I'm Amber Mitchell, 28 years old, and last Thanksgiving changed my life forever. Sitting at that mahogany table surrounded by crystal glasses and forced smiles, I never imagined my parents would actually say those words. The turkey grew cold as my father's voice cut through the silence. "If this is the path you're choosing, you're not welcome in this house anymore." My mother's eyes, usually warm amber like mine, turned to ice as she nodded in agreement. Years of trying to be the daughter they wanted crashed down in that single moment. The hollowness in my chest expanded until I could barely breathe. Before I continue this story, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button to join our community of survivors who've rebuilt their lives from scratch. Trust me, you'll want to stick around for what happened next. The seeds of my family's rejection were planted long before that devastating Thanksgiving dinner. I grew up in a household where achievement wasn't celebrated, it was expected. My father, Richard Mitchell, was a renowned cardiovascular surgeon whose name appeared in medical journals. My mother, Eleanor, commanded courtrooms as a corporate attorney, winning cases that made national headlines. Their success cast long shadows that my brother, Jason, and I were expected to fill. From kindergarten, Jason embraced the family legacy. He brought home perfect report cards, captained debate teams, and eventually graduated from Wharton with honors. My parents beamed at his business acumen, especially when he landed an executive position at a Fortune 500 company before turning 30. Family dinners became showcases for Jason's latest accomplishments. Then there was me, the family anomaly. While I maintained good grades, my heart belonged to art. I filled sketchbooks with designs and illustrations, transforming blank pages into vibrant worlds. When I won a regional art competition in 9th grade, my mother's response cut deep. "That's nice, dear, but don't let it distract you from your biology exam." My father was more direct. "Art is a hobby, Amber, not a career. The Mitchell name stands for excellence in real professions." Those early dismissals were warning signs I was too young to recognize. Every science fair ribbon earned praise, while my art contest medals were relegated to my bedroom drawer. My parents spoke of my creative phase as something I would outgrow, like a childhood fondness for fairy tales. The first major battle erupted during my senior year of high school. College applications became a battlefield. My parents had planned my pre-med track at Northwestern since my birth, their alma mater, where the science building bore my grandfather's name. "I'm applying to Rhode Island School of Design," I announced over dinner one night. "Their graphic design program is one of the best in the country." The silence that followed was deafening. My father set down his fork with surgical precision. "That's not happening," he stated. "We've already spoken with Dr. Winters in admissions at Northwestern. Your application is being given special consideration." "I don't want to be a doctor," I countered, my voice smaller than intended. "I've never wanted that." My mother's laugh was brittle. "Amber, every child goes through rebellion. You'll thank us when you're established in a respectable career instead of struggling to sell drawings." The argument escalated for weeks. Eventually they compromised, or so they called it. They would pay for college if I attended Northwestern with a double major, biology and art. "At least you'll have something to fall back on when reality sets in," my father said. 2 miserable years into pre-med, I transferred to the art program against their wishes. My mother's words when I called to tell them still ring in my ears: "You're throwing your life away for doodles." They reluctantly continued paying tuition, making it clear this was their final concession to my poor judgment. Each holiday break became an interrogation about when I'd come to my senses. Graduation day should have been triumphant. I received my diploma with honors in graphic design. My parents attended but remained stone-faced through the ceremony. When my name was called with distinction, my father checked his watch. At the post-graduation dinner, they barely acknowledged my achievement. Instead, my mother pivoted the conversation to Jason's recent promotion. "At least one of our children understands the value of practical success," she said, raising her glass. The toast wasn't for me. My first job at Horizon Design Studio paid barely enough to afford a tiny apartment with a roommate in a questionable neighborhood. When I excitedly shared the news of landing my first professional creative position, my father's response was, "How much does that pay? Enough for retirement contributions." That small apartment became my first taste of independence, a place where my artwork covered the walls without criticism. Still, I carried my parents' disapproval like a shadow, second-guessing every career decision. Then Ryan Coleman entered my life. We met at a coffee shop where I was working on freelance projects during weekends. Handsome and confident, he seemed genuinely interested in my design work, asking questions about my creative process and career goals. After years of dismissal from my family, his attention felt like oxygen to a drowning person. The first 6 months with Ryan were intoxicating. He introduced me to his friends, brought me to networking events, and seemed proud to have an artistic girlfriend. I mistook his possessiveness for passion, his criticism for caring. Slowly, the supportive boyfriend facade cracked. His feedback on my portfolio pieces shifted from constructive to cutting. "This design is amateur. Is this really what they taught you in that expensive art school?" His words mirrored my father's dismissals so closely that I accepted them as truth. Communication with my family became increasingly strained. Sunday phone calls dwindled to monthly obligations filled with uncomfortable silences and subtle digs about my artistic experiment. When I stopped sharing details about my life to avoid criticism, they accused me of becoming secretive and distant. I didn't recognize then how I was caught between two toxic situations: my family's conditional love and Ryan's controlling behavior. Both measured my worth against impossible standards. Both made me feel fundamentally flawed for pursuing my passion. Looking back, I see how perfectly the stage was being set for what was to come. The foundation of my self-worth had been systematically undermined, preparing me for the complete rejection that awaited. The first major betrayal blindsided me on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I was finalizing a project at work when my phone lit up with a text from my Aunt Laura, my mother's younger sister. "Praying for your grandmother. Let me know if there's anything I can do." My blood ran cold. My grandmother, my mother's mother, had been battling heart problems, but no one had called to tell me anything was wrong. With shaking hands, I dialed my mother. No answer. Then my father. Straight to voicemail. Finally, Jason picked up on the 4th ring. "Oh, you heard," he said, sounding distracted. "Yeah, Grandma had another episode. She's at Street Mary's. Room 412. "When did this happen?" I asked, already grabbing my purse and signaling to my manager that I needed to leave. "This morning around 9. They've got her stabilized now." I checked my watch. 3:30 p.m. "Why didn't anyone call me?" A pause. "I guess we figured you'd be busy with your art stuff. Mom said she'd reach out later." I rushed to the hospital, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. When I arrived at room 412, I found my entire family already assembled: my parents, Jason, 2 aunts, an uncle, and 3 cousins. They looked up in surprise as I entered, as though I was an unexpected guest, crashing a private gathering. "Amber," my grandmother said weakly from the hospital bed, her face brightening. "They told me you couldn't make it." The statement hung in the air like an accusation. My mother shifted uncomfortably. "No one told me until half an hour ago," I said, moving to embrace my grandmother carefully around the monitoring wires. "Aunt Laura texted me." My mother's expression tightened. It slipped my mind with everything happening. "We knew you had work deadlines." "You called Jason at work," I pointed out. "That's different," my father interjected. "Jason's position allows him flexibility for family emergencies." My grandmother patted my hand. "I've missed you, dear." "You never visit anymore." Confusion crossed my face. "I tried to visit 2 weeks ago, but Mom said you weren't feeling up to company." My grandmother frowned. "That's strange. I've been asking about you for months. They said you were too busy with your new artsy friends to make time for family." The revelation struck like physical blow. While I'd been missing my grandmother terribly, my parents had been constructing a narrative that I was the one pulling away. I glanced around the room, noting how my cousins avoided my eyes. How long had this been going on? What other family gatherings had I supposedly declined to attend? After visiting hours ended, I confronted my mother in the hospital parking lot. Why would you tell Grandma I didn't want to see her? Why didn't you call me immediately when she was admitted? My mother looked weary, but her voice remained controlled. You chose a life that keeps you busy with creative pursuits. We're simply acknowledging the distance you've created. I haven't created any distance. You're the ones pushing me away because I didn't become a doctor or lawyer. My brother Jason approached, jingling his car keys. Why are you attacking Mom after what she's been through today? This is exactly why we handle things without you now. Everything becomes a drama about your feelings. This isn't about my feelings, I protested. It's about being excluded from family emergencies and having lies told about me. My father joined us, his authoritative presence immediately dominating the conversation. You chose your path away from us, Amber. You can't reject our guidance and values then demand to be included in family matters on your terms. The statement left me speechless. In their eyes, pursuing my passion for art equated to rejecting my family. My career choice wasn't just a disappointment, it was a betrayal that justified cutting me out. I drove home in tears, feeling hollow. When I arrived at my apartment, I called Ryan, desperate for comfort. Instead of support, he seemed irritated by my distress. You're always so dramatic about your family, he sighed. If they don't appreciate you, stop seeking their approval. It's getting old, Amber. My grandmother is in the hospital, I said, stunned by his dismissal. And my family deliberately didn't tell me. Well, maybe if you'd chosen a more respectable career like they wanted, they'd respect you enough to include you, he replied. You can't expect them to celebrate your rejection of their values. His words echoed my father's so precisely that the parallel was impossible to ignore. Ryan, who had once seemed like an escape from my family's criticism, was reinforcing the same damaging message: my worth was conditional on meeting others' expectations. The following weeks revealed how extensive my family's exclusion had become. Through casual conversations with relatives, I discovered I'd declined invitations to a cousin's engagement party, an uncle's retirement celebration, and several family dinners. My parents had effectively erased me from family events, while making me the villain who had chosen absence. When I confronted my mother about this pattern during our next strained phone call, she deflected. You made it clear your priorities lie elsewhere. We're simply respecting your choices. The gaslighting made me question my own reality. Had I somehow communicated that I wanted distance? Was I wrong to pursue a career I loved if it cost me my family? Ryan offered no refuge from these doubts. His criticism of my career choices intensified, often comparing my modest graphic design salary to his friends' earnings in finance and law, comparisons eerily similar to those my parents made between Jason and me. You could do so much better than that artsy crowd you hang around, he'd say. Your parents are right about one thing: you're wasting your potential on pretty pictures. I found myself caught in a psychological vice grip between my family and boyfriend, both squeezing my self-confidence from different directions. I started experiencing anxiety attacks before family interactions, my heart racing at the sight of my parents' number on my caller ID. Sleep became elusive as I replayed conversations, searching for ways I could have responded differently to earn their approval. The isolation grew suffocating. I began making desperate attempts to bridge the widening gap with my family, sending thoughtful gifts that received cursory acknowledgments, suggesting lunch dates that were perpetually rescheduled, offering to help with family events only to be told arrangements were already handled. After my grandmother was discharged from the hospital, I visited her apartment with flowers and her favorite pastries. She seemed genuinely happy to see me, but our conversation revealed more painful truths. Your mother says you're going through a difficult phase, she said, patting my hand. That your boyfriend isn't a good influence, and you've been struggling since choosing that art career. I sat stunned as she continued. They're just worried about you, dear. They say you seem lost and unhappy whenever they see you. The systematic distortion of my life to family members became clear. In my parents' revised narrative, my unhappiness stemmed not from their rejection but from my poor choices. They had constructed an alternative reality, where they were the concerned parents of a wayward daughter, rather than the architects of my exclusion. I left my grandmother's apartment feeling like I was drowning in a sea of manipulated perceptions. The family I had known or thought I had known was disappearing behind a wall of strategic misrepresentations, leaving me grasping for a truth that seemed increasingly elusive. 6 months after my grandmother's hospitalization, the foundation of my independent life began to crumble. Horizon Design Studio announced company-wide layoffs due to losing their biggest client. Despite positive performance reviews, my position was eliminated, the dreaded last hired, first fired scenario playing out in real time. My parents' reaction to my unemployment was predictably unsympathetic. "We told you art wasn't a stable career," my father said during our monthly phone call, his tone carrying the unmistakable undercurrent of satisfaction that comes from having one's negative predictions fulfilled. "The entire economy is unstable right now," I countered. "People in all industries are losing jobs." "Your brother's company just announced record profits," my mother interjected. "They're actually hiring more staff. I'm sure if you asked nicely, Jason could put in a word for an entry-level position in their marketing department." The suggestion that I should abandon my career and beg my brother for a job felt like salt in an open wound. "I'm a skilled graphic designer, Mom. I'll find another position in my field." "Suit yourself," my father sighed. "But don't come crying to us when your rent is due." Unfortunately, the job market was more challenging than I anticipated. Design studios had implemented hiring freezes, and freelance work became increasingly competitive as laid-off creatives flooded the market. My modest emergency savings dwindled alarmingly fast. Meanwhile, Ryan's attitude toward my unemployment shifted from superficially supportive to openly contemptuous. Initially, he made a show of encouraging me, reviewing my portfolio and suggesting contact, but as weeks passed without job offers, his patience evaporated. "You've been moping around the apartment for a month," he complained one evening as I revised my portfolio for the third time. "Maybe this is a sign you should reconsider your career path. Your parents might have been right all along." "I'm not moping," I defended myself. "I'm actively looking for work. I had 2 interviews last week for jobs that pay barely above minimum wage," he scoffed. "My ex-girlfriend from college just made partner at her law firm. Meanwhile, you're competing with teenagers for graphic design gigs." Each day brought increasing financial pressure. When my rent check was due with insufficient funds to cover it, I faced the humiliating prospect of calling my parents for help. After 3 sleepless nights, I swallowed my pride and dialed their number. My father answered with his customary brusque greeting. When I explained my situation, the silence on the line stretched painfully before he responded. "This is exactly what we warned you about, Amber. Creative careers are unreliable. You chose this path against our advice, and now you're facing the consequences." "Dad, I just need a small loan until I find another position." "I've never asked you for money since graduation," he sighed heavily. "Come by the house tomorrow evening. We'll discuss terms." The following evening, I sat across from my father in his home office while he wrote a check that would cover 2 months' rent. The process was excruciating, more job interview than family assistance. He required a detailed accounting of my expenses, job prospects, and repayment plan. "I'm not running a charity," he explained while drafting a repayment agreement for me to sign. "This is a loan with expectations attached. Every dollar will be repaid with interest." "I understand," I said quietly, fighting back tears of humiliation. Furthermore, he continued, sliding the paper across his mahogany desk, "We expect weekly updates on your job search. If you haven't secured appropriate employment within 60 days, we'll discuss more drastic measures, including potential career redirection." The loan came with strings designed to pull me back into their vision for my life. My father's carefully constructed agreement wasn't just about money, it was about control. When I returned to my apartment with the check, Ryan's reaction compounded my humiliation. "So Daddy bailed you out after all," he smirked. "What did it cost you?" "Let me guess, they want their good little girl to leave the art world behind." "It's just a loan," I insisted, though the document in my bag said otherwise. Ryan's criticism escalated over the following weeks. My unemployment became his favorite target during arguments, a convenient weakness to exploit whenever he felt insecure or controlling. The parallels between his manipulative behavior and my parents' conditional support became impossible to ignore. The breaking point in our relationship arrived unexpectedly on a Tuesday afternoon. I'd gone to a coffee shop to work on a small freelance project when I realized I'd left my external hard drive at home. Returning to our apartment earlier than expected, I found Ryan with a woman I recognized as his coworker, locked in an intimate embrace on our couch. The confrontation that followed was ugly. Instead of apologizing, Ryan turned the blame on me. "What did you expect?" he shouted as I threw his belongings into a suitcase. "You've been completely self-absorbed since losing your job, always moping, always the victim. It's exhausting being with someone so needy and unsuccessful." "How long has this been going on?" I demanded, my hands shaking with rage and betrayal. "Does it matter? Madison has her life together. She doesn't whine about her parents not understanding her artistic vision." The revelation that Ryan had been confiding my personal family struggles to his affair partner felt like a second betrayal. "Get out," I whispered, then shouted when he didn't move, "Get out." After he left, slamming the door behind him, the full weight of my isolation descended. My family had emotionally abandoned me. My boyfriend had betrayed me. The career I'd fought for was in jeopardy. Standing in my half-empty apartment, I felt completely alone. The following week brought another blow. Mutual friends began acting distant, and one finally admitted the reason Ryan had been spreading stories about me, claiming I'd become mentally unstable after losing my job, that I was clinically depressed and possibly developing a drinking problem. None of it was true, but the damage to my social circle was immediate and devastating. With my support system in shambles, I downsized to an even smaller apartment in a less desirable neighborhood. The rent reduction was necessary, but the move felt like another step backward. Each box I packed represented another piece of the independent life I'd tried to build crumbling away. I took any freelance design work available, logo designs for local businesses, layout for self-published authors, even designing flyers for neighborhood events, at rates far below market value. The work kept the lights on but barely covered groceries. The emergency fund my parents' loan had provided was depleting rapidly, and the weekly progress reports I was obligated to send them grew increasingly desperate. My father's responses were curt and critical. "Perhaps this struggle will finally teach you the lesson we've been trying to impress upon you for years." Rock bottom arrived on a rainy Thursday evening. After a particularly discouraging job rejection, I sat on the floor of my nearly empty apartment, surrounded by unpaid bills and dwindling prospects. For the first time, I considered that perhaps they had been right all along. Maybe I wasn't meant for a creative career. Maybe my entire adult life had been a misguided rebellion against the practical path they'd laid out for me. As I contemplated surrendering to their vision for my life, my phone chimed with a text message. It was from a woman named Megan Thompson, whom I'd met briefly at a local design meetup months earlier. "Hey, noticed you at Cornerstone Coffee Shop today. You look deep in design mode. Want to grab coffee sometime and talk shop? Always good to connect with fellow creatives in this economy." That simple message, a casual reaching out from a near stranger, became an unexpected lifeline. In my darkest moment, when I was ready to abandon my dreams, a random connection reminded me that I wasn't completely alone. I responded immediately. "Coffee sounds perfect. How about tomorrow?" Little did I know that this casual coffee meetup would become the first step toward rebuilding my life from the ashes of what I'd lost. But before that rebuilding could begin, I would have to face the most devastating rejection of all, the one that would finally sever the remaining threads connecting me to my family. After months of minimal contact with my parents, I received an unexpected text message from my mother in mid-November: Thanksgiving dinner at our house, next Thursday 4 p.m. Your attendance is expected. The directive, not invitation, sent my anxiety spiraling. Our last few interactions had been tense phone calls regarding my loan repayment schedule, which I'd fallen behind on despite taking every freelance job available. Still, a small, persistent hope flickered that perhaps this dinner represented an olive branch, a chance to repair our fractured relationship. I spent the week preparing thoughtfully for the reunion. Despite my limited budget, I splurged on ingredients for my grandmother's apple cranberry crisp, the one dish I'd always been praised for at family gatherings. I selected modest but tasteful gifts: a silk tie for my father in his favorite shade of navy, a scented candle from my mother's preferred boutique, and a best-selling business book Jason had mentioned wanting to read. The morning of Thanksgiving, I dressed carefully in a burgundy sweater dress that projected both professionalism and holiday spirit. I applied makeup to conceal the exhaustion etched beneath my eyes from months of financial stress and 70-hour work weeks cobbling together freelance gigs. In the mirror, I rehearsed calm, diplomatic responses to the inevitable interrogation about my career and finances. "I've established a growing client base," I practiced saying, instead of "I'm barely making rent." "I'm focusing on building sustainable business relationships" sounded better than "I'm taking any job that pays immediately." Driving to my parents' colonial-style home in the affluent suburb where I'd grown up, I gave myself a final pep talk. Stay positive, don't get defensive, find common ground. This is a chance to start fresh. My mother answered the door with her camera-ready smile, the one reserved for colleagues and acquaintances rather than family. "Amber, you're early," she noted, though I'd arrived exactly at 4 as instructed. Her perfunctory hug felt like embracing a mannequin. The house was immaculate, as always, decorated with the harvest-themed centerpieces and table settings my mother ordered annually from her preferred designer. The familiar scent of roasting turkey and sage stuffing momentarily transported me to happier Thanksgivings from childhood, before career expectations and disappointments had erected walls between us. My father emerged from his study, acknowledging me with a curt nod before returning to his pre-dinner scotch and financial news. Jason arrived moments later with a bottle of expensive champagne, receiving the enthusiastic welcome I'd been denied. "There's my successful son," my father boomed, clapping Jason on the shoulder. "Wait until you hear his news, Eleanor. The golden boy's done it again." Dinner began with stilted small talk about the unseasonably cold weather and distant relatives' health concerns. I contributed, carefully conscious of not dominating the conversation or introducing potentially controversial topics. When I offered to help in the kitchen, my mother declined with a tight smile. "I have a system, dear. You'd just disrupt it." As my father carved the turkey with surgical precision, Jason cleared his throat dramatically. "Since the family's all together, I have an announcement." He began reaching for his champagne glass. "Davidson and Burke has named me their youngest vice president of operations. The promotion comes with a substantial raise and stock options." My parents erupted in congratulations, my mother actually clapping her hands in delight while my father proposed an immediate toast. To Jason, he declared, continuing the Mitchell tradition of excellence. "We never doubted you'd rise to the top," my mother added. "It's in your DNA." I offered sincere congratulations, genuinely happy for my brother, despite the pointed reminder of how differently our career paths were valued. "That's wonderful news, Jason. You've worked incredibly hard for this." The brief acknowledgement of my comment was quickly overshadowed as my parents launched into detailed questions about Jason's new position, office location, and compensation package. The conversation continued, uninterrupted, through the appetizer and main course, a 20-minute celebration of Jason's corporate achievement. Only after the plates were cleared for dessert did my mother's attention abruptly shift to me. "And what about you, Amber? Any progress on the job front? Her tone carried the same forced enthusiasm adults use when asking children about school projects they find uninteresting. Actually, yes, I replied, trying to inject confidence into my voice. I've secured 3 regular clients for ongoing design work, including a promising startup that, freelancing still. My father interrupted, his disappointment palpable. I thought the goal was stable employment with benefits. I'm building toward that, I explained. In this economy, many companies are hiring contractors before offering permanent positions. It's a foot in the door. My mother sighed dramatically. It's been months, Amber. Jason was never unemployed a day in his life. Different industries work differently, I said, struggling to maintain my composure. Creative fields often start with contract work before. Speaking of contracts, my father interjected, you're now 2 months behind on loan repayments according to our agreement. The shift from career criticism to financial embarrassment felt calculated to maximize discomfort. Jason smirked. You borrowed money from Dad. I thought you were so determined to make it on your own artistic merit. Heat rushed to my face as I set down my fork. I had an emergency after being laid off. I'm working to repay it as quickly as possible. Perhaps if you'd chosen a sensible career path like we suggested, my mother offered with false sympathy, you wouldn't find yourself in these desperate situations. I took a deep breath, reminding myself of my resolution to stay calm. I understand you're disappointed in my career choice, but graphic design is a legitimate profession. I'm building a client base despite a challenging economy. My father scoffed. A legitimate profession that leaves you unable to pay your bills or honor financial commitments. I've never missed a rent payment. I defended, my voice rising slightly despite my best efforts. And I've been transparent about the repayment timeline adjustments. Always excuses with you, my mother sighed, serving herself another helping of cranberry sauce. Remember the Matthews daughter, the one you went to high school with? She's a resident at Mass General now. Her parents were just telling us at the club about her buying her first condo. Good for her, I said tightly. I'm happy she's successful in the career she chose. The career her parents wisely guided her toward, my father corrected. Some children understand the value of parental wisdom. Others insist on learning through unnecessary hardship. The systematic dismantling of my dignity continued through dessert. Each achievement I mentioned was minimized, each strategy questioned, each hope dismissed as unrealistic. The pattern was familiar: death by 1,000 cuts rather than a single blow. Finally, after my 3rd attempt to explain the positive trajectory of my most promising client relationship was interrupted with another comparison to a more successful peer, something inside me shifted. The fear of disapproval that had governed my interactions with my family suddenly seemed less important than maintaining my self-respect. I understand you're disappointed in me, I said quietly but firmly, setting down my dessert fork. You've made that abundantly clear for years. But I'm a grown woman making my own choices, building a career I find meaningful. My mother's eyes widened at the interruption of their criticism. Don't be dramatic, Amber. We're simply expressing concern about your welfare. No, I countered, my voice steadier than I expected. You're expressing disappointment that I didn't become who you wanted me to be. There's a difference. Now listen here, my father began, his authoritative courtroom voice emerging. We've supported you despite your questionable choices. We paid for your education, loaned you money when you were desperate, and you've wielded that support like a weapon, I replied. Real support doesn't come with the constant reminder that I'm a disappointment. Real love isn't contingent on following your approved life plan. Jason rolled his eyes dramatically. Here we go with the artistic temperament. Can we have one holiday dinner without your victimhood narrative? I'm not claiming to be a victim, I said. I'm setting a boundary. I can respect your concern while rejecting the notion that my worth is determined by following the exact career path you prescribed. My father's face flushed with anger. You, ungrateful after everything we've done for you. You have the audacity to lecture us about boundaries. I'm grateful for the privileges and opportunities you've provided, I acknowledged. But those things don't entitle you to control my adult life or continually demean my choices. My mother's voice turned ice cold. Perhaps if you made better choices, we wouldn't need to point out their obvious flaws. The conversation had reached the breaking point I'd been dreading, yet somehow anticipating for years. Still, I tried one last time to bridge the widening chasm between us. I love you both, I said, my voice catching slightly. And I want a relationship with you. But I need that relationship to include respect for my autonomy and my career path, even if it's not what you would have chosen. My father pushed back from the table with such force that water glasses trembled. His next words emerged with deliberate, cutting precision. If this is the path you're choosing, you're not welcome in this house anymore. We've tolerated your rebellion and poor decisions long enough. Until you're ready to demonstrate appropriate respect for our guidance and make sensible choices regarding your future, consider yourself uninvited from this family. The statement hung in the air like a physical presence. My mother's silent nod of agreement delivered the final blow. Jason examined his manicured fingernails, his smirk conveying smug satisfaction at my final fall from familial grace. The room tilted slightly as I absorbed the full impact of my father's words. This wasn't a heat-of-the-moment outburst, it was the culmination of years of conditional acceptance reaching its inevitable conclusion. The tenuous threads connecting me to my family had finally irrevocably snapped. With surprising steadiness, I rose from the table. I understand your position, I said, my voice hollow but controlled. Thank you for clarifying where we stand. I gathered my coat and purse from the hall closet, acutely aware of the gifts I'd brought still sitting unwrapped by the entryway. No one followed me to the door. No one called after me as I walked to my car through the bitter November cold. Only when I was safely inside my vehicle, out of view from the house's bay windows, did the tears begin. They came not in dramatic sobs, but in silent streams that blurred the familiar neighborhood streets. As I drove away from my childhood home, away from the only family I'd ever known. The finality of the rupture settled into my bones as I pulled onto the highway. I had no home to return to for Christmas, no family to call on birthdays, no emergency contacts for hospital forms. At 28, I had become effectively orphaned by choice, not my choice but theirs. In the parking lot of a suburban shopping center, I sat watching holiday shoppers bustling between stores with cheerful bags and excited children. Families together, connections intact, all the things I'd just lost. With trembling fingers, I texted Megan, the only person I could think to reach out to. Something terrible happened. My family just disowned me. I have nowhere to go. Her response came immediately. My address is 1422 Oakwood Lane, Apt. 3B, doors unlocked. Come over. You're not alone. Those 4 words, "you're not alone," became a lifeline as I navigated toward an unfamiliar apartment and an uncertain future. They were the first tentative step toward rebuilding from complete devastation, though I couldn't possibly imagine then what that rebuilding would entail or where it would lead me. The first week after the Thanksgiving disaster passed in a haze of disbelief. Megan's couch became my temporary sanctuary, a fold-out sleeper that creaked with every movement but represented the only safe harbor in my suddenly stormy existence. Her one-bedroom apartment was barely big enough for one person, let alone 2, but she never once hinted that my presence was an imposition. "Stay as long as you need," she insisted, clearing drawer space for my hastily packed belongings. "I've been through family drama too. Nobody should have to face that alone." Reality arrived in cold, practical waves. I needed to collect the rest of my possessions from my apartment before the month ended. I couldn't afford to renew the lease. My few remaining freelance deadlines required attention despite my emotional turmoil. Life continued its demands even as my foundation had collapsed. During those first disoriented days, I kept expecting my phone to ring with my mother's conciliatory voice, or at least a text acknowledging the severity of what had transpired. Nothing came. The silence from my family, was a deafening confirmation that their ultimatum hadn't been an emotional outburst, but a considered decision. On day 9 of my couch surfing existence, I broke down and checked my family members' social media accounts, seeking any hint of regret or reference to what had happened. Instead, I found my mother's perfectly curated holiday photos featuring my father and brother at a country club Thanksgiving weekend event. "So blessed to celebrate with family," the caption read, the conspicuous absence of any mention of me speaking volumes. The studied erasure continued when my aunt posted photos from a family birthday celebration I hadn't been informed about. My cousin's wedding save the date arrived addressed only to Megan Thompson and guest, with no acknowledgement that I was the indefinite guest currently occupying her living room. My parents' technique became clear. Rather than acknowledging our rift, they were systematically removing evidence of my existence from the family narrative. No dramatic announcements, no public disowning, just a quiet excision as if I'd never been. The silence eventually broke with a single cold text from my mother 2 weeks after Thanksgiving. "Your father expects a commitment to the repayment schedule despite your emotional display. Professional behavior includes honoring financial obligations regardless of personal feelings. No acknowledgement of their rejection. No opening for reconciliation. Just a reminder of debt and responsibility divorced from any recognition of our shattered relationship." I didn't respond, unable to formulate words that wouldn't escalate the situation further. Meanwhile, my precarious financial situation deteriorated further. The emotional aftermath left me struggling to focus on design work, causing me to miss a crucial deadline for my largest client. Their understanding initially gave way to frustration and ultimately termination of our contract. The loss of that income stream left me with barely enough for basic necessities, let alone repayment of my father's loan. Depression settled over me like a heavy blanket, muffling motivation and distorting perspective. Simple tasks like showering or preparing meals required monumental effort. Sleep became either impossible or excessive, with no healthy middle ground. I stopped responding to emails, missed networking events, and allowed potential opportunities to slip away, trapped in a paralytic combination of grief and anxiety. Megan did her best to help, bringing home information about design opportunities and practically dragging me to a holiday market where local businesses were seeking marketing help. But each interaction felt performative. My professional persona, now a mask I could barely keep in place long enough to make it through introductions. "I'm worried about you," Megan admitted one evening in mid-December. "You're not eating, barely sleeping, and I haven't seen you touch your sketchbook in weeks." "I'm fine," I lied, the standard response having become automatic. "Just need more time to process everything." The holiday season, with its relentless emphasis on family togetherness, twisted the knife deeper. Every commercial decoration and seasonal song became a reminder of what I'd lost. Department store displays of perfect family gatherings around glittering trees felt like personal attacks. The Christmas cards arriving from Megan featuring smiling parents with grown children reinforced my newfound status as familyless. The final blow came when my brother texted on Christmas Eve. "Mom and Dad are pretty upset about your tantrum. When are you going to grow up and fix things with them?" The audacity of framing my parents' rejection as my responsibility to repair sent me into a tailspin. I blocked his number, then spent hours sobbing while Megan was at her family's Christmas Eve dinner, an invitation she'd offered to extend to me, but which I declined, unable to bear witnessing another family's functional dynamics. As December gave way to January, my isolation deepened. Former friends from my social circle with Ryan remained distant, clearly having accepted his version of events. Professional contacts stopped reaching out after repeated non-responses to networking opportunities. I was becoming a ghost in my own life, fading from relevance in both personal and professional spheres. The new year should have represented hope and fresh starts, but instead brought a notice that my storage unit containing remaining belongings from my former apartment would be auctioned if payment wasn't received by month's end. The practical erosion of my former life continued in parallel with the emotional devastation. When my laptop essential for any design work developed a critical hardware issue, I couldn't afford to repair. The downward spiral accelerated. Without my primary tool, even the few remaining freelance opportunities became impossible to fulfill. My mother's voice echoed in my head, "If you'd chosen a sensible career path." The thought that perhaps they had been right all along became a persistent toxic companion. My lowest point arrived during a bleak January evening when I discovered my mother had been systematically contacting extended family members and family friends with a carefully constructed narrative about my mental state. My cousin inadvertently revealed this during a rare sympathetic text. "Mom mentioned your parents are heartbroken about your struggles with depression and instability. They said you rejected their help and support during a mental health crisis. Is there anything I can do?" The realization that my parents were portraying themselves as concerned, rejected helpers rather than the ones who had explicitly cut me off felt like the cruelest gaslighting. They were rewriting history to preserve their reputation while I suffered in silence. That night, alone in Megan's apartment while she worked a late shift, I reached the precipice of complete surrender. Maybe the path forward required abandoning my career, apologizing for imagined transgressions, and accepting my parents' vision for my life. Maybe independence and authentic self-expression were luxuries I simply couldn't afford. Maybe survival required submission. As I contemplated drafting an email of capitulation to my parents, my phone pinged with a notification. My Aunt Laura, my mother's younger sister who had always been somewhat of a family outlier herself, had sent a direct message. "Something doesn't add up in the story your mother is telling about what happened at Thanksgiving. She says you had a breakdown and stormed out after they offered help with your career struggles." Knowing my sister and her version of help, I suspect there's another side to this story. "I'm in town next weekend. Coffee." That small gesture, one family member questioning the official narrative and offering to listen, became an unexpected anchor in the storm. Though I wasn't yet ready to see it, that message represented the first tentative step toward building a different kind of support system, one based on genuine connection rather than obligation and control. But before I could begin that rebuilding process, I needed to hit absolute rock bottom, and I wasn't quite there yet. Aunt Laura's coffee invitation became an unexpected turning point. We met at a quiet cafe, far from my parents' neighborhood, where she listened without interruption as I recounted the Thanksgiving confrontation and its aftermath. "That sounds exactly like my sister Laura," sighed when I finished. "Eleanor has always believed love should be conditional on meeting expectations. It's how our father raised us." Learning that my mother's controlling behavior had generational roots didn't excuse it, but helped me contextualize the dynamics that had shaped our relationship. For the first time, I saw my family situation through an objective lens rather than through the distortion of guilt and self-doubt. As we said goodbye, Laura pressed an envelope into my hand. "Consider it a belated Christmas gift," she insisted when I tried to return it. Inside was a check with "For new beginnings" written on the memo line, enough to cover 3 sessions with a therapist. "I can't accept this," I protested. "You can and you will," she said firmly. "I spent years in therapy unpacking our family dynamics. It's the best investment I ever made." She pulled out her phone and showed me a contact, Dr. Samantha Hayes. She specializes in family trauma. The first session is already scheduled for Monday. My initial resistance to therapy stemmed from my parents' dismissive attitude toward mental health support. "Mitchells don't need shrinks," my father had declared whenever the topic arose. Walking into Dr. Hayes's warmly lit office that Monday felt like an act of rebellion against that ingrained belief. Dr. Hayes, with her calm demeanor and direct questions, created a space where I could examine my family relationships without judgment. "What you're describing sounds like emotional abuse," she said during our second session, the words landing like a thunderclap. "Abuse seems too strong," I protested. "They provided everything materially. Emotional abuse often coexists with material provision," she explained. Controlling behavior, conditional love, threats of abandonment, these are classic patterns regardless of financial support. Those early sessions focused on recognizing the dysfunctional patterns that had shaped my self-perception. I began to understand how I'd internalized my parents' critical voices, how Ryan had recognized and exploited those vulnerabilities, and how my tendency to seek approval had undermined my confidence in my own choices. Your parents are entitled to their disappointment, Dr. Hayes noted. What they're not entitled to is making their love contingent on you fulfilling their expectations. That's the boundary we need to establish. Parallel to my therapy journey, Aunt Laura connected me with another unexpected source of support. "Remember Professor Reed from the art department?" she asked during one of our regular coffee meetups. "She always spoke highly of your work. I ran into her at a gallery opening and mentioned your situation. She'd like to meet." Professor Catherine Reed had been my most influential teacher during college, the one faculty member who had recognized and nurtured my talent without qualification. Our reunion at her campus office felt like reconnecting with a part of myself I'd begun to lose. "The industry is challenging right now," she acknowledged when I explained my career struggles, "but your portfolio still shows tremendous promise." She examined my recent work with a critical but encouraging eye. "You've developed a distinctive style, Amber. That's something many designers never achieve." Professor Reed offered practical assistance alongside emotional support, connections to former students working in the industry, tips for restructuring my portfolio, and eventually an opportunity to teach a weekend workshop at a community art center. The modest teaching fee provided crucial financial breathing room, while reminding me that my creative skills had value beyond my parents' assessment. By early March, the combined effect of therapy, supportive relationships, and small professional victories had begun to shift my perspective. I still carried grief over my family estrangement, but it no longer defined every moment of every day. I found myself sketching again during free moments, the creative impulse gradually returning as emotional healing progressed. The next significant step forward came unexpectedly through Megan, whose patience with my couch surfing had extended far beyond reasonable expectations. "My friend Rachel is looking for a roommate," she mentioned casually one evening. "She has a 2-bedroom in Riverside that's actually affordable. Want me to introduce you?" Rachel Wilson turned out to be exactly the roommate I needed at that stage of recovery, someone with enough emotional intelligence to respect boundaries without walking on eggshells around my situation. During our first meeting, she shared her own family history without prompting. "My parents disowned me when I came out in college," she explained matter-of-factly. "Took about 5 years before we started speaking again, and it's still complicated. So I get the whole family holiday awkwardness thing." Moving into Rachel's apartment marked my transition from emergency survival mode to intentional rebuilding. The small bedroom with its eastern exposure provided perfect morning light for creating. For the first time in months, I had physical space that belonged to me, where I could arrange my remaining possessions and create a sanctuary conducive to both work and healing. Rachel introduced me to meditation and journaling practices she'd developed during her own family estrangement. "Writing letters you never send can be surprisingly therapeutic," she suggested, demonstrating her technique for externalizing thoughts too complex or painful to process internally. My first attempts at meditation were frustrating exercises in mind-wandering, but gradually, I developed the ability to observe my anxious thoughts without becoming entangled in them. The practice created small spaces between stimulus and reaction, giving me precious moments to choose responses rather than operating from conditioned patterns. Through Rachel, I connected with a community art group that met weekly in a converted warehouse space. Unlike the competitive design world, these gatherings emphasized creative expression without judgment, providing a safe environment to reconnect with the joy of creation that had originally drawn me to art. "Your technique is impressive," commented Eliza, a retired art teacher during one session. but I notice you hesitate before making bold strokes, almost as if you're seeking permission." Her observation crystallized a pattern Dr. Hayes and I had been exploring in therapy: my tendency to second-guess creative choices, perpetually seeking an approval that would never come from my original intended audience. As spring arrived, bringing seasonal renewal that paralleled my gradual healing, I found myself developing stronger boundaries in all areas of my life. When my mother sent a terse email inquiring about loan repayment status without acknowledging our estrangement, I responded with calm professionalism rather than emotional reactivity. "I'll resume payments when my financial situation stabilizes. I'll update you quarterly on progress." No apologies, no justifications, no emotional hooks for her to exploit. The first time I declined a call from my father without spiraling into anxiety represented a significant milestone. "You're allowed to control access to your life," Dr. Hayes had emphasized repeatedly. "Setting boundaries isn't punishing them, it's protecting yourself." Financially, I remained in survival mode, but small opportunities began appearing: a logo design for Rachel's Friends startup, a website update for the Community Arts Center, consulting on marketing materials for a local restaurant. None provided substantial income individually, but collectively they kept basic needs met while allowing me to rebuild my portfolio with current work. When Professor Reed invited me to assist with a weekend design bootcamp for high school students, I discovered an unexpected talent for teaching. Translating complex design principles into accessible lessons forced me to articulate knowledge I'd internalized, but never verbalized. The students' enthusiasm reminded me why I'd fallen in love with design initially: the joy of visual problem solving and creative expression. "You should consider teaching more regularly," Professor Reed suggested afterward. "You have a natural ability to connect concepts to practical application. That's rarer than you might think." By late spring, I'd established a tenuous but functioning new normal. My professional identity was evolving to include teaching alongside design work. My social circle, though small, consisted of genuine connections rather than the conditional relationships I'd known previously. Therapy continued to provide essential tools for processing both acute grief and long-standing patterns. The most profound shift occurred internally: a gradual reframing of my family estrangement from devastating failure to painful but necessary boundary. Dr. Hayes helped me recognize that while I couldn't control my parents' actions or attitudes, I could determine how much power their judgment held over my self-perception. "Their inability to accept your choices reflects their limitations, not yours," she emphasized during one particularly breakthrough session. "You can love them while still acknowledging that their conditional approval is too costly to your well-being." That reframing process allowed me to begin distinguishing between genuine grief over lost family connection and the conditioned shame of failing to meet impossible expectations. Both feelings were valid, but understanding their different sources helped prevent them from becoming entangled in ways that paralyzed progress. By early summer, exactly 6 months after the Thanksgiving disaster, I experienced my first day without thinking about my family estrangement at all. The realization came that evening as I prepared for bed. I'd moved through an entire day focused on present challenges and opportunities rather than past wounds. Though the achievement might have seemed minimal to others, to me it represented a profound milestone in recovery. "Healing isn't linear," Rachel reminded me when I shared this observation. "You'll have good days and setbacks. The goal isn't never feeling pain, it's not being defined by it." Her wisdom echoed what I was learning through multiple channels: from therapy, from new friendships, from creative practice, and from my own emerging resilience. The family dinner that had left me without a home had ultimately forced me to build something potentially more valuable: a life authentically my own, founded on self-acceptance rather than external validation. That foundation, though still fragile, would soon be tested by new challenges and unexpected opportunities, including a final confrontation that would either permanently sever or potentially transform my family relationships. July arrived with an unexpected email from Sarah Adams, creative director at Elevate Design Collaborative, a boutique agency known for innovative work with sustainable businesses. Professor Reed recommended your portfolio. We have an opening for a junior designer. Available for interview next week. The opportunity felt almost too perfect, exactly the kind of ethically aligned creative environment I'd dreamed of working in. The interview preparation consumed my free time for days, refining my portfolio, researching the agency's recent projects, practicing responses to potential questions with Rachel and Megan. Professor Reed provided invaluable insider perspective during our pre-interview coffee meeting. Sarah values conceptual thinking over technical perfection, she advised. Be prepared to discuss your process, not just show final products. And don't hide your teaching experience. They value designers who can articulate concepts to clients. The interview itself unfolded better than I could have anticipated. Sarah's collaborative approach immediately set me at ease, turning what could have been an intimidating evaluation into an engaging creative conversation. What interests me most is your evolution over the past year, she noted, scrolling through my portfolio. There's a depth and authenticity in your recent work that wasn't present earlier. What changed in your approach? The question created a moment of vulnerability. Should I mention my personal struggles, or keep the conversation strictly professional? I opted for honest but measured disclosure. A major life transition forced me to reconnect with why I became a designer originally, I explained. When everything external was stripped away, I had to decide whether this career truly mattered to me or if I was just trying to prove something to others. Sarah nodded appreciatively. That shows in the work. Designers often hit that crossroads, creating to please others versus creating from authentic vision. The latter always produces more compelling results. 2 days later, Sarah called with an offer, a junior designer position, with a 3-month probationary period, health benefits, and a salary that, while modest by industry standards, represented financial stability I hadn't experienced in over a year. I accepted, immediately overwhelmed by the confluence of professional opportunity and personal validation. The subsequent weeks brought rapid positive change. With steady income assured, I found an affordable studio apartment closer to the agency's downtown location. The space was small but entirely mine, the first time since the family rupture that I could create a home environment without dependence on others' generosity. My first projects at Elevate challenged and energized me in equal measure. Sarah's management style emphasized mentorship rather than criticism, providing guidance while encouraging creative risk-taking. The collaborative team environment contrasted sharply with both the isolation of freelancing and the toxic competitiveness I'd experienced at previous firms. By September, I'd successfully completed the probationary period, receiving positive feedback and increasingly complex assignments. My financial situation had stabilized enough to establish a repayment plan for Aunt Laura's loan and begin building modest savings. The constant anxiety about basic survival needs finally eased, creating mental space for longer-term planning and deeper healing. During this period of professional growth, I maintained minimal contact with my parents. Monthly emails updating my father on financial status received brief acknowledgments but no personal engagement. I'd accepted this detached arrangement as the new normal when an unexpected development shattered the uneasy equilibrium. On a Wednesday afternoon in late September, I returned from lunch to find the receptionist looking uncomfortable. "Your mother is waiting in the visitor area," she informed me quietly. "She doesn't have an appointment but insisted on seeing you." The sudden intrusion of my family drama into my carefully constructed professional sanctuary sent a surge of panic through my system. Taking a deep breath, I mentally reviewed the boundary-setting techniques from therapy before walking to the reception area. My mother sat primly on the modern visitor couch, looking simultaneously out of place and completely self-assured in her tailored business attire. Her expression upon seeing me contained an unsettling mixture of critical assessment and artificial warmth. "Amber, darling," she greeted, rising to embrace me with the same performative affection I remembered from childhood achievements. What a lovely office. Very creative. Mother, I responded, maintaining professional composure while leading her to a small conference room for privacy. This is unexpected. Is everything all right? We heard about your new position, she explained once the door closed behind us. Jason's friend Brandon works for one of your agency's clients. Small world, isn't it? The calculated way she established that they had been monitoring my career progress despite the estrangement sent a chill down my spine. What can I help you with today? I asked, deliberately bypassing the implicit invitation to express surprise or gratitude for their attention. Your father and I have been discussing your situation, she continued smoothly. Now that you've finally secured appropriate employment, we think it's time to move past this unfortunate rift in our family. The holidays will be here before we know it. The proposition landed like a lead weight, no acknowledgement of their rejection, no accountability for the pain inflicted, just a convenient revision of history, now that my career had gained legitimacy in their eyes. The old Amber would have leapt at this chance for reconciliation on any terms. The woman I'd become recognized it for what it was, an attempt to re-establish control without addressing fundamental issues. What specifically are you proposing? I asked, maintaining neutral tone despite the emotions churning beneath. We'll expect you for Sunday dinner this weekend, she stated, rather than suggested. Your father is prepared to establish a more reasonable repayment schedule for your loan now that you're properly employed. We can put this unpleasantness behind us. The unpleasantness being when Dad explicitly stated I wasn't welcome in your home anymore, I clarified, watching her expression tighten at the direct reference. You were both upset, she deflected. Things were said in the heat of the moment. That's water under the bridge now that you're getting your life in order. The conditional nature of the offered reconciliation couldn't have been clearer. Now that I had achieved status they deemed respectable, they were willing to reinstate limited family privileges. Their acceptance remained entirely contingent on external markers of success, rather than genuine care for my well-being or respect for my autonomy. I appreciate you coming here, I began carefully, but reconciliation would require acknowledgement of what actually happened and how it affected me. Dad didn't make an emotional statement, he regretted. He delivered a calculated ultimatum that you supported. I've spent the past year rebuilding my life after that rejection. My mother's expression hardened into the familiar mask of disapproval I'd grown up fearing. This is exactly the sort of overdramatic reaction that concerned us about your emotional stability. We're offering an olive branch, and you're responding with accusations. I'm stating facts, not making accusations, I corrected gently. I can't pretend the estrangement never happened or that it didn't profoundly impact my life. Real reconciliation would need to start with honest conversation about those impacts. So you're refusing our invitation, she asked, incredulously, as though I'd declined a generous gift rather than a manipulation attempt. I'm suggesting that we need foundational repair before casual Sunday dinners, I clarified. I'd be open to family therapy as a starting point. The mention of therapy triggered visible revulsion. Mitchells don't air family matters with strangers, she dismissed immediately. If you're not mature enough to move forward without dramatics, then perhaps we were premature in reaching out. Perhaps you were, I agreed, surprising myself with the calm certainty in my voice. I'm open to rebuilding our relationship, but not at the expense of the boundaries and self-respect I've worked hard to establish. My mother gathered her designer handbag with practiced dignity. Your father will be extremely disappointed by this response. I hope you reconsider before burning bridges permanently. I'm not burning bridges, I responded as we walked toward the exit. I'm asking for authentic connection rather than conditional acceptance. The invitation remains open when you're ready for that conversation. Her departing glance contained genuine bewilderment. She truly couldn't comprehend my refusal of their terms. In her worldview, their willingness to reinstate family membership should have been received with gratitude rather than stipulations. The confrontation triggered an inevitable cascade of family pressure. My father called that evening, his authoritative voice vibrating with controlled anger as he lectured me about family loyalty, respect, and the consequences of continued defiance. When reasoned arguments failed to persuade me, he resorted to financial threats regarding the outstanding loan, which I calmly informed him was being repaid according to documentation we both possessed. This attitude will cost you more than you realize, he warned before disconnecting. Family is irreplaceable. Jason's contribution to the pressure campaign arrived via text. Way to upset everyone again. Mom's crying and Dad's furious. Would it kill you to just apologize and act normal for once? The coordinated effort to make me responsible for both the original estrangement and the failed reconciliation attempt would have devastated me months earlier. Now fortified by therapy and genuine support systems, I recognized the manipulation tactics for what they were. The most painful escalation came when extended family members began reaching out with concerned messages, clearly having received my parents' revised narrative about my continued emotional instability and rejection of family support. The campaign to portray themselves as wounded, well-meaning parents reached extended relatives, family, friends, and even my mother's former college roommate, who inexplicably felt entitled to email me expressing disappointment in my choices. Aunt Laura provided crucial perspective during this onslaught. This is exactly what Eleanor did when I set boundaries with our parents, she confirmed. Flying monkeys deployed to pressure you back into compliance. Hold your ground, it eventually stops when they realize it's not working. The final confrontation that permanently altered my family dynamics occurred in early October, when my father called unexpectedly during my lunch break. His voice held an unusual hesitancy beneath the customary authority. Your mother is very upset about this situation, he began without greeting. It's affecting her health. The least you could do is apologize and accept our generous offer of reconciliation. Something in his phrasing crystallized years of family patterns into perfect clarity. Dad, I interrupted gently. I'm not responsible for managing Mom's emotions or health. That's between her and her doctor. And reconciliation isn't something generous you offer, it's something we would build together through mutual respect and accountability. That new job has clearly filled your head with disrespectful attitudes, he snapped, reverting to familiar territory. This defiance has gone on long enough. I'm giving you one last chance to make the right choice. Sunday dinner, 5 p.m. Be there or accept the consequences. The ultimatum hung between us, so similar to the one delivered at Thanksgiving, yet somehow powerless to inspire the same fear. In the intervening months, I'd rebuilt a life based on authentic connections and internal validation. His threat of rejection no longer carried the devastating impact it once had. I've already accepted the consequences of prioritizing my well-being, I responded with unexpected steadiness. I love you and Mom, and I'm open to rebuilding our relationship on healthier terms whenever you're ready for that. But I won't sacrifice my self-respect to maintain appearances or manage your emotions. The silence that followed felt significant, not the stunned silence of shock, but the weighty pause of fundamental realignment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a note I'd rarely heard: uncertainty. You've changed, he stated simply. Yes, I agreed. I needed to. After another lengthy pause, he sighed. I'll tell your mother you've made your decision. Please tell her I love her, I added. That hasn't changed even if our relationship has. The call ended without resolution, but with a subtle shift, the first conversation with my father, where I'd maintained boundaries without either capitulating or escalating. Whether it represented the final communication or the first step toward eventual authentic reconciliation remained unclear, but either outcome now felt survivable. That evening I met Ethan Parker at a gallery opening featuring work by artists from the community studio. We'd connected initially through a design project for his sustainable architecture firm, our professional collaboration gradually evolving into friendship and cautious attraction. Unlike Ryan, whose initial support had masked controlling tendencies, Ethan demonstrated consistent respect for my autonomy and genuine interest in my creative perspective. "You seem preoccupied tonight," he observed as we examined an abstract sculpture. "Everything okay?" I surprised myself by sharing the day's confrontation openly, without minimizing either the situation or its emotional impact. The ability to discuss family dynamics honestly without shame or justification represented significant healing progress. Ethan listened attentively without offering immediate solutions or judgments, another contrast to previous relationships. "That sounds incredibly difficult," he acknowledged when I finished. "How are you feeling about how you handled it?" "Sad, but strangely peaceful," I admitted. "For the first time, I didn't abandon myself to gain their approval. That feels like growth, even though the outcome is painful." His genuine smile conveyed understanding without pity. "Definitely growth. Impressive growth." As we continued through the gallery discussing the artwork rather than dwelling on family drama, I recognized another milestone in recovery: the ability to experience difficulty without being defined or consumed by it. My parents' rejection remained painful, but it no longer determined my worth or dominated my identity. The career opportunity, supportive connections, and strengthened boundaries had converged to create something I'd previously been unable to imagine: a life both professionally fulfilling and emotionally authentic, independent of family validation. The path forward remained uncertain, but for the first time that uncertainty felt like possibility rather than threat. 6 months after the final confrontation with my parents, I stood in my new apartment, arranging fresh flowers in a ceramic vase I'd made during weekend pottery classes. April sunlight streamed through windows that overlooked a small community garden, a modest view but one that represented hard-won independence and stability. My position at Elevate Design had evolved beyond initial expectations. Sarah had assigned me to lead a rebranding project for a women's nonprofit, after my conceptual approach resonated strongly with the client. The successful completion of that project led to increased responsibilities and a performance review that included words I'd once feared I'd never hear in a professional context: exceptional creative vision and valuable team. Contributor. The steady income allowed me to establish a repayment plan for outstanding debts, starting with Aunt Laura's therapy gift, which she reluctantly allowed me to reimburse. My father's loan remained a more complicated matter: each monthly payment, transferred without personal communication, the financial transaction our only remaining connection. Therapy with Dr. Hayes continued, though we had transitioned to bi-weekly sessions focused on maintaining boundaries and processing grief rather than crisis management. "Estrangement grief doesn't necessarily resolve," she explained during one particularly insightful session. "It can become integrated into your life experience without dominating it." That integration process manifested in unexpected ways. I still experienced pangs of sadness when encountering father-daughter dance scenes in movies, or hearing stories of supportive parents celebrating their children's achievement. Mother's Day advertisements still triggered complicated emotions. But these moments no longer derailed my functioning or sense of self-worth. "Grief coexists with growth," Dr. Hayes reminded me. "Acknowledging the loss doesn't negate your progress." That progress extended beyond career stability into meaningful relationships. My friendship with Rachel had deepened into chosen sisterhood, a bond based on mutual respect and shared experiences, rather than genetic obligation. Megan remained a steadfast support, her initial generosity evolving into balanced reciprocity as I became capable of contributing equally to our connection. Ethan and I had navigated from professional acquaintance to friendship to a relationship grounded in authentic communication. Unlike Ryan's love bombing followed by control, Ethan's approach to connection emphasized consistent respect and genuine interest. When conflict arose, as it inevitably did, we addressed issues directly rather than manipulating or withdrawing. "You're allowed to have needs and express them clearly," he remarked during an early relationship discussion. "That's not being difficult, it's being honest." The statement so perfectly countered my family's messaging about accommodating others at all costs that I nearly cried. Gradually, I was unlearning the belief that worthiness required self-erasure, a process that transformed all my relationships, not just romantic ones. Aunt Laura remained my one active family connection, our regular coffee meetings, providing both emotional support and occasional updates on family dynamics. She respected my boundaries by never pushing reconciliation, while acknowledging the complex grief of estrangement. "Your mother mentioned you indirectly at Easter dinner," she reported during one such meeting. "Something about hoping absent family members find their way back eventually. It's the first acknowledgement I've heard in months. I absorbed this information without the desperate hope for reconciliation that would have consumed me earlier. If they're ready for honest conversation someday, I'm open to it, but I can't return to pretending for the sake of family harmony." Laura squeezed my hand supportively. "That's wisdom, not stubbornness. There's a difference." As the holiday season approached again, the second since the Thanksgiving confrontation, I found myself contemplating how differently I would experience it this time. Rather than dreading family exclusion, I focused on creating meaningful traditions with my chosen family. Rachel, who shared my experience of family estrangement, proposed hosting a misfit Thanksgiving for those without traditional family gatherings to attend. The idea evolved into a potluck dinner in my apartment with Rachel, Megan, Ethan, Aunt Laura, and 2 colleagues from Elevate who were unable to travel home for the holiday. The gathering contrasted sharply with my childhood Thanksgiving memories. Our mismatched dishes and eclectic menu replaced my mother's coordinated table settings and traditional fare. Conversation flowed naturally without my father's controlling presence directing appropriate topics. Laughter erupted frequently unrestrained by concerns about maintaining proper appearances. To finding family in unexpected places, Ethan toasted, raising his glass, and building connections that nourish rather than deplete. The sentiment perfectly captured what I discovered through painful experience, that genuine connection based on acceptance provided more sustenance than blood relationships built on conditional approval. While I still carried grief for the family relationships I'd lost, I'd gained a profound appreciation for chosen bonds formed through mutual respect rather than obligation. The holiday season brought one final attempt at contact from my parents, an email from my mother with the subject line "Holiday Reflections." The message itself contained no direct acknowledgement of our estrangement, but offered vague references to difficult years and hoping for healing in the coming season. It concluded with an open invitation to Christmas dinner, should I feel ready to rejoin the family. After careful consideration and consultation with Dr. Hayes, I crafted a response that maintained boundaries while avoiding unnecessary harshness. "Thank you for reaching out. I appreciate the invitation, but have made holiday plans already. I remain open to rebuilding our relationship through honest conversation about past events and establishing healthier patterns for the future. Perhaps we could consider family therapy in the new year as a starting point. Wishing you peaceful holidays." The response represented significant growth, neither capitulating to maintain peace nor rejecting connection entirely, but rather establishing conditions under which reconciliation might become possible. Whether my parents would ever accept those conditions remained uncertain, but I'd reached a place where their decision no longer determined my well-being. As winter gave way to spring, other aspects of my life continued flourishing. Ethan and I began discussing the possibility of moving in together when my lease ended in summer. The prospect of consciously choosing cohabitation from a position of independence felt vastly different from my previous experiences of living with Ryan or depending on friends during crisis. "We should make a list of non-negotiables and preferences," Ethan suggested pragmatically. "Figure out where we need separate space versus shared areas. The thoughtful approach to combining lives while respecting individual needs represented exactly the kind of relationship I'd never witnessed in my family of origin, but had come to recognize as healthy and sustainable. Professionally, my career continued expanding in directions I hadn't anticipated. My design work for the nonprofit sector had attracted attention from similar organizations, creating a specialty niche that aligned perfectly with my personal values. Sarah encouraged this development, allowing me to dedicate a portion of my time to cause-driven projects alongside commercial work. The best designers find their unique intersection of skill and purpose, she advised during a portfolio review. You've found yours more quickly than most. I'd also begun teaching monthly workshops at the Community Arts Center, sharing design principles with enthusiastic students ranging from teenagers to retirees. The teaching role provided not only supplemental income but also profound satisfaction in helping others develop their creative voices, something I'd been denied in my own formative years. My art side business had gradually taken shape as well. What began as therapeutic creative expression evolved into a small but growing source of income, with several pieces selling at local galleries and through online platforms. Creating purely for self-expression without client constraints provided essential balance to my commercial design work. A year and a half after being told I wasn't welcome in my parents' home, I found myself with a career I loved, a relationship based on mutual respect, a supportive circle of friends, and a growing sense of peace with my family situation. The healing wasn't complete, perhaps it never would be, but the wounded, desperate person sobbing in a shopping center parking lot had transformed into someone stronger, wiser, and more authentic. The irony, I remarked to Dr. Hayes during one of our monthly check-in sessions, is that losing my family ultimately forced me to find myself. Sometimes the most painful losses create space for essential growth, she agreed. Though I wish you hadn't had to learn that lesson so harshly. As I reflect on this journey from rejection to rebuilding, I'm struck by how differently I now understand the concept of home. Home isn't necessarily where you start, it's where you finally feel seen, accepted, and valued for who you truly are. Sometimes we need to create that place for ourselves, building it relationship by relationship, choice by choice, day by day. The family dinner where I lost my birth home became the catalyst for finding my true home, not a physical place but a state of being, where I could live authentically without sacrificing my self-respect for conditional acceptance. If you're watching this and facing your own version of family rejection, conditional love, or the painful process of setting boundaries with toxic relationships, please know that there is life, rich, meaningful, joyful life on the other side of that pain. The rebuilding process isn't quick or easy, but it's infinitely worth the effort. I'd love to hear about your experiences with family estrangement or setting boundaries in the comments below. What helped you through the darkest moments? What unexpected sources of support did you discover? Please like this video if my story resonated with you. Subscribe for more authentic conversations about navigating difficult family dynamics. Share with anyone who might need to hear that they're not alone in these struggles. Thank you for witnessing my journey, and remember, your worth isn't determined by those who couldn't see it. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is to walk away and build something better.